Jack Nicholson as Randall McMurphy. Jack Nicholson was born on April 22, 1937 in Neptune, New Jersey. At the age of 38, Nicholson played Randall McMurphy, an unpredictable character who rebelled against the system in the 1975 film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And this role catapulted him to stardom and became a turning point, shaping both his career and the subsequent turmoil in his personal life. His marriage to Sandra Knight had already ended years earlier, but the emotional differences persisted long after the divorce. The increasing intensity of his work, for example in films like The Shining, 1980, and Chinatown, 1974, and the relentless preparation for his roles distanced him further and further from a stable family life. The end of his 17-year relationship with Anjelica Huston became one of the most painful breakups in Hollywood, especially since Nicholson already had 2 children with Rebecca Broussard before the split. For decades, Nicholson's physical and mental health suffered increasingly from the effects of a life constantly lived in extreme situations. After filming The Departed in 2006, he increasingly turned down scripts. Memorizing lines became more and more difficult, and long-term projects became more demanding. By the time he retired after How Do You Know, in 2010, his sphere of influence had noticeably shrunk. The man who had once dominated the set with explosive energy had finally stepped down. Not voluntarily, but due to circumstances. In 2025, at the age of 88, Nicholson lives a secluded life in Los Angeles, surrounded by his decades-long art collection. Only a select few have access to his private circle. His fortune, estimated at around $400 million, stems from historic profit-sharing agreements, including an unprecedented salary and profit-sharing contract for the 1989 Batman film, which earned him over $60 million from that film alone. Louise Fletcher as Sister Ratched. Louise Fletcher was born on July 22, 1934, in Birmingham, Alabama. At 41, Fletcher played Nurse Ratched in the 1975 film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the cold embodiment of controlling behavior. This role changed her life overnight, earned her an Oscar, and catapulted her back into the limelight after more than a decade away. But this success came at a price, one she rarely speaks about publicly. Her marriage to producer Jerry Bick had begun to crumble long before her Oscar win, as she took an 11-year break from acting to raise her children. After her return with the film Thieves Like Us, 1974, she faced immense pressure in the film industry, while Bick's career stagnated, further exacerbating the separation. Following the success of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, she received numerous film offers, but the escalating family tensions ultimately led to their divorce in 1977. Her unwavering will to continue working led her to roles in The Exorcist II, 1977, and Firestarter, 1984. But each project came with the emotional strain of rebuilding her life piece by piece. As she aged, Fletcher became even more committed to work to maintain her stability, taking on roles in film and television, including the critically acclaimed 6-year role of Kai Nguyen in Star Trek Deep Space Nine. The busy schedule helped her regain her motivation, but the physical strain became increasingly apparent as respiratory problems increasingly limited her mobility and ability to work. She took on roles in Virtuosity, 1995, Cruel Intentions, 1999, and Shameless, 2011 to 2012, demonstrating that she had overcome difficulties and avoided a career stagnation like the one she had experienced previously. Fletcher died peacefully on September 23, 2022, at the age of 88 in Montereau, France, after a life of resilience and public brilliance. Her net worth of approximately $1 million at the time of her death reflected decades of work interruptions, modest television salaries, and the financial strain of restarting her career twice. She was buried in the French countryside where she had spent her last years. Will Sampson as Chief Bromden. Will Sampson was born on September 27, 1933, in Okmulgee County, Oklahoma. At the age of 42, in 1975, he played the taciturn giant Chief Bromden in the film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, a man who hid unspeakable pain behind his calm facade. This performance catapulted him virtually overnight from the rodeo arena to Hollywood. From that moment on, the world recognized his talent, but few suspected how fragile his life truly was. He kept his marriage to Jill Sampson largely secret, but the emotional pain of losing 2 sons, one killed in a drunk driving accident, the other murdered years later, deepened wounds that his work could never heal. During the filming of The Outlaw Josie Wales, 1976, and Poltergeist II, 1986, He had to take on physically demanding roles while his health silently deteriorated. A stark contrast to the struggle he faced as the sole breadwinner for his surviving children. The mounting pressure of being one of the few nationally recognized indigenous actors compounded the strain. By the mid-1980s, scleroderma attacked his lungs and heart, causing his weight to plummet from approximately 250 pounds to around 150 pounds. Even as his health deteriorated, he remained determined to continue his cultural work with the Native American Theater Company. He refused to let illness rob him of his identity as an artist and activist. In his final months, he prepared for a heart-lung transplant in Houston, an operation he hoped would bring him many more years with his family and allow him to continue his artistic career. But complications arose, and the hope with which he had entered the operating room faded all too quickly. Sampson died of kidney failure on June 3, 1987, at the age of 53, just 43 days after a kidney transplant, and was buried in the wildlife refuge where he grew up. His fortune at the time, estimated at around $500,000, came from films, artwork exhibited in major museums, and appearances that promoted the public presence of North America's indigenous population. Brad Dourif as Billy Bibbit. Brad Dourif was born on March 18, 1950 in Huntington, West Virginia. At 25, Dourif played the terrified boy Billy Bibbit in the 1975 film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. This role earned him an Oscar nomination and a BAFTA award, catapulting him into the limelight in a way he never expected. From that moment on, fame followed him, but the shadows he had to fight against for decades continued to haunt him. His first marriage to Janet Stephanie Sharmatz fell apart as his fame grew rapidly, and long shooting days left him little time to mend the relationship. By the time he divorced Joni Dourif in 1986, he was raising 2 daughters and battling increasing depression as his work slowed. Roles such as those in Blue Velvet, 1986, and Mississippi Burning, 1988, demanded great psychological depth and often reflected the inner conflicts he was trying to escape. Particularly after the success of Chucky cemented his reputation as an actor of dark characters. Although he never publicly disclosed any serious illnesses, decades of pressure to portray characters with mental health issues and the associated emotional toll led to periods of isolation. This pressure intensified during the 2002 to 2003 Lord of the Rings era, when his worldwide fame unexpectedly returned, forcing him back into the spotlight he had long avoided. Even in his later years, exhaustion continued to affect his decisions, eventually leading him to withdraw from all projects except those involving Chucky. In 2025, at the age of 75, Dourif lives a quiet life in Woodstock, New York. He works only selectively and returns only when the Chucky universe calls. His fortune of approximately $6 million stems from decades of film work, recurring television roles, and one of the most iconic voice roles in horror film history. He remains a character audiences will never forget. Christopher Lloyd as Max Tabor. Christopher Lloyd was born on October 22, 1938, in Stamford, Connecticut. At the age of 37, Lloyd played Max Tabor, a rebel who dared to question the strict order of the treatment facility, in the 1975 film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. This breakthrough role paved the way for some of the most iconic roles in film history. Yet behind each of these eccentric moments of brilliance lay a series of personal upheavals. His 5 marriages painted a picture of a man constantly searching for stability, only to find fleeting security. The failure of each marriage, from Catherine in 1971 to Jane in 2005, left deep emotional wounds and intensified the loneliness that often plagued him between film projects. Even during the hugely successful Back to the Future era of the 1980s, the pressure to maintain relationships while simultaneously making global blockbusters kept his personal life in turmoil. By the time he married Lisa Loyocono in 2016, he had spent decades healing the wounds of each failed marriage. The psychological strain of these breakups was compounded by the 2008 Tea Fire, which destroyed his Montecito home and cost him over $1 million. Although his physical health remained good, such events plunged him into anxiety, especially as his age slowed the rebuilding process. His performances in demanding roles, such as Judge Doom in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, 1988, and Uncle Fester in The Addams Family, 1991, helped him maintain his optimism. He repeatedly returned to film and theater, using acting to process the emotional trauma of personal events. In 2025, at the age of 87, Lloyd continued to appear on screen, taking on final roles with the quiet determination of a man who refused to give up the profession that had sustained him. His net worth of approximately $40 million stemmed from blockbuster films, a long television career, and real estate investments he rebuilt after the devastating fire of 2008. He remains an icon of resilience in Hollywood, a man whose characters have shaped pop culture, while his private life has weathered one crisis after another. Vincent Schiavelli as Fredrickson. Vincent Schiavelli was born on November 11, 1948, in Brooklyn, New York. At the age of 27, in 1975, Schiavelli played the role of Fredrickson in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, a melancholic, gentle patient whose quiet presence lingered long after the film ended. His imposing height of 1.97 meters and his unmistakably melancholic eyes made him one of cinema's most recognizable supporting actors. But behind this striking screen image was a man whose life was marked by illness and suffering. His first marriage to actress Alice Beasley crumbled under the constant pressure of work and health problems related to Marfan syndrome, leading to his emotional breakdown just as his film career was taking off. Even after remarrying harpist Carol Sue Mukalian in 1992 and establishing a more stable family life, the shadow of his chronic illness never completely disappeared. His body, affected by Marfan syndrome since childhood, made it difficult for him to muster the stamina required for films like Ghost, 1990, and Batman Returns, 1992, leading him to seek refuge in writing. Each of his cookbooks, in which he intertwined memories, recipes, and family stories, was not just about food, but also about how he coped with the quiet loneliness that the illness brought. In the late 1990s, lung damage from years of smoking exacerbated his predisposition to Marfan syndrome, forcing him to leave Hollywood in 1996 and permanently retire to Sicily. Even during the filming of Tomorrow Never Dies in 1997, he struggled with persistent fatigue and concealed his deteriorating health to avoid losing his job. His hometown of Polizzi Generosa became his refuge, a place where he hoped to find more time through a slower pace of life and distance from the film industry. But there, too, he contracted lung cancer. Schiavelli died on December 26, 2005, at the age of 57 in his home in Sicily, where he had found peace, and was buried in the Polizzi Generosa cemetery. His estate of approximately $1 million reflects a life he dedicated to writing, as well as 3 published books that help preserve his family's memory. Although he died prematurely due to illness, his legacy lives on in his more than 120 roles and in the gentle sadness he brought to every single scene. Scatman Crothers as Turkle. Scatman Crothers was born on May 23, 1910, in Terre Haute, Indiana. At the age of 65, Crothers played Turkle, the cunning and compassionate night watchman who brought both trouble and kindness to the hospital in the 1975 film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. His warm voice and natural rhythm made him one of Hollywood's most versatile artists. But behind this charm lay a life spent battling racial barriers and a final decade overshadowed by a serious illness. His marriage to Helen Sullivan in 1937 was one of the rare interracial marriages of the time, a relationship that lasted nearly 50 years despite the hostility they faced during their tours. Her frequent travels between Ohio, California, and Las Vegas were often attempts to escape the discrimination that severely limited her performance opportunities and even her accommodations. Even after the success of the film The Aristocats, 1970, and a long-standing creative partnership with Jack Nicholson on films like The Shining, 1980, Crothers quietly carried the weariness of decades of fighting for equality in an industry that rarely allowed black actors leading roles. Helen remained his unwavering support, nurturing him through the later stages of his career as voice acting became easier for him with age. By the mid-1980s, his years of smoking had taken their toll. Lung cancer spread rapidly, eventually reaching his esophagus and weakening him so much that he could no longer record the jazz vocals for the Transformers films. In the last weeks of his life, he was bedridden but remained determined to work as long as possible, even completing several episodes despite the pain. Crothers died on November 22, 1986, at the age of 76 at his home in Van Nuys, and was buried in Forest Lawn Memorial Park Cemetery in Los Angeles. He amassed a fortune of approximately $500,000 through his lifelong dedication to music, acting, and voice acting. He pioneered the role of black artists in mainstream animation and television. His legacy lives on in each of his characters through his warm, witty, and rhythmic voice. Sidney Lassick as Charlie Cheswick. Sidney Lassick was born on July 23, 1922, in Chicago, Illinois. at the age of 53. In 1975, Lassick played the role of Charlie Cheswick, a troubled, childlike patient in a therapeutic institution, in the film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. This performance marked the pinnacle of a long career. Behind the forced laughter of his characters, his private life was quietly crumbling. He kept his personal life largely secret, and without a spouse or partner, his illness became a lonely battle. His diabetes worsened over the years until complications eventually forced a leg amputation. A devastating blow for an actor whose livelihood depended on constant travel between film sets. Even when he starred in the 1976 film Carrie and the successful horror film The Unseen, he was plagued by the deep fear that, as his condition deteriorated, he would lose both his health and his roles. By the 1990s, his illness had worsened further. His acting range was limited. He received fewer roles. His recovery was slower, and he was unemployed for an extended period. His brief appearance in the 1999 film Man on the Moon marked a surprising comeback, reminding audiences of his talent for imbuing each of his quirky characters with a deeply touching humanity. However, his diabetes worsened, making each hospital stay feel longer than the last. Lassick died on April 12, 2003, at the age of 80, from complications of his diabetes at Midway Hospital in Los Angeles, and was buried in Mount Sinai Memorial Park Cemetery, under a simple headstone bearing the Star of David. His fortune, estimated at around $500,000, reflects decades of steady, small-scale work that rarely offered him security. His legacy lies not in his wealth, but in the trembling voice and fragile dignity he brought to Cheswick. Danny DeVito as Martini. Danny DeVito was born on November 17, 1944, in Neptune City, New Jersey, at the age of 31. In 1975, he played the role of Martini, a chaotic and restless comedian, in the film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. This small but unforgettable role laid the foundation for a career that would later make him Hollywood's most unexpected king of comedy. From then on, fame and turmoil became part of his life. His decades-long marriage to Rhea Perlman was marked by several separations, reflecting the emotional exhaustion he experienced from working in the entertainment industry. After 30 years of marriage, they separated in 2012, briefly reconciled in 2013, and finally separated in 2017, but never divorced. A rare relationship characterized by age, fidelity, and their 3 children. During the filming of movies like Twins, 1988, and while directing Matilda, 1996, his chronic arthritis, caused by Fairbanks disease, made him a far greater burden on any long-term project than audiences might have realized. The pressure of financially unsuccessful independent projects, however, exacerbated family tensions. Health problems never prevented him from working, but the emotional strain of a turbulent marriage and the exhaustion of long shooting schedules shaped a more withdrawn personality than he appeared to be in real life. For example, the use of prosthetics and long working hours on the 1992 film Batman Returns aggravated his bone pain, a reminder that physical limitations plagued him with every major role. Nevertheless, he continued to produce films with Jersey Films, including Pulp Fiction, 1994, and Garden State, 2004. His resilience had become a special kind of survival. In 2025, at 81 years old, DeVito was still starring in the film It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, overcoming age and pain with the unwavering joie de vivre of a comedian. His fortune of approximately $80 million stems from decades of work as an actor, director, and producer, including long-term royalties for films that have shaped generations. And behind the laughter lies a story of resilience. William Redfield as Dale Harding. William Redfield was born on January 26, 1927 in New York City. At the age of 48, Redfield played the intelligent but vulnerable Dale Harding in the 1975 film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, a character in a rehabilitation clinic. His performance reflected decades of stage experience, but behind this nuanced facade lay a body that was quietly and gradually deteriorating. His marriage to Linda Bright offered him temporary stability, but the leukemia diagnosed during filming destroyed their family life. As his health deteriorated, the mental and physical strain alienated him from his wife and children. Linda watched helplessly as her husband grew weaker while simultaneously trying to continue working. His roles in Fantastic Voyage, 1966, and Death Wish, 1974, established his reputation, but his illness made rehearsals painful and performances uncertain. His leukemia progressed rapidly, draining him as he struggled to fulfill his stage commitments and maintain the discipline that had defined his career since childhood. The production team of the film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest noticed his symptoms even before he realized it himself, a worrying sign of the onset of cancer. Toward the end of his life, he had difficulty breathing, his mobility was limited, and even speaking required great effort. Nevertheless, he remained dedicated to his work, a commitment that helped him overcome the difficulties, but also exhausted him. Within a year of filming beginning, his body could no longer withstand the strain. Redfield died on August 17, 1976, at the age of 49, from complications of a respiratory illness caused by leukemia, and was buried in Long Island National Cemetery in New York. His estate of approximately $200,000 reflects a life devoted to stage and television, not the fame of a Hollywood star. His death marked the end of a brilliant theatrical career. He left behind a son who would later follow in his father's footsteps.